Mahadzakava? Maybe you don't have that page. Are you missing a page?
This is my second packet.
Oh, no, you need that packet. It's the wrong packet. Because I saw Africa. I saw Africa. So, this image right here, this Buddha is the most famous Buddha in all of Tibet, and it's the most venerated or worshipped or important image in Tibet, this icon here. So, date is real iffy here. We keep coming a lot of iffy dates. I don't know, but the date's pretty iffy. I will tell you that the artist who made this Buddha, the sculptor who made this, only made a limited edition of 8 to 10, and he made them during Buddha's lifetime, the actual human, mortal person Buddha. So this was made during Buddha's lifetime. So you may remember or may not that Buddhism begins in India and then spreads to China. And so the real person Buddha saw this sculpture and gave it a thumbs up. It was like, this is me. Yep. So it's authenticated by Buddha himself, which I guess is a really important thing. If you're making a sculpture of somebody, you want them to be like, yes, that's me. You really captured me well there. Now, don't get too stressed out when it comes to media. If you were trying to get T1, if this piece was on the exam and you're trying to get T1, and you say, well, it's Buddhist, it's from Tibet, maybe you remember the title, Zhou Rinpoche, or something close to that. Remember, it doesn't have to be exact. As long as you give a couple of the media, you're fine. You don't have to give that whole long list of media. So remember, when you guys see the word gilt, that just means covered in gold, right? So if something's gilt, or it changes to a D when we say gilded, just means covered in gold. And then the extra offerings that are if we think about this as an altarpiece, right? Like a relief, this extra stuff on the sides, some of that was brought here as an offering. So I would connect this piece with little Saint Foy, the reliquary that held a little piece of her skull, because remember, people brought offerings to it. So even though this is Buddhism and that was Christianity, this idea of bringing offerings in hopes of being blessed, that's something churches still do today, right? So yeah, context, or actually I would say function. So function, it's that idea of bringing something to it to be blessed in return. And then if you wanted to, you just write on the side, or you could put it under maybe content or context, the similarity to Saint Foy. Bright colors, obviously, gold. And then if we look at the lanterns that are in front of him, each one of these lanterns is oil burning, right? So you have this flame burning with oil, and the offerings were brought here. Now, if Sydney makes the trip to Tibet to go to this Yonghe temple, and it's because her mom is sick, right? She could, when she gets to the temple, she's going to write her mom's name on a tiny little strip of paper. And then that strip of paper is going to be rolled up really, really small, right? Like a grain of rice. And then it's going to be burned in one of these lanterns in front of Buddha. And as that piece of paper burns, the wish, the prayer, the message is going to float up through the ashes and smoke and hopefully be granted by Buddha. So Zhou Rinpoche means wish-fulfilling jewel. Wish-fulfilling jewel. So that's what this form of Buddha is. He is fulfilling wishes. So wishes could be like a prayer, right? How would you describe the form here? If you had to describe this Buddha to somebody, what would you say? Like they're looking at a room full of Buddhas. How do they know which one you're talking about?
Shiny.
Shiny, gold, elaborate, expensive. Notice his symmetry, right? This perfect symmetry of his face. And then we even have symmetry of some of the area around him. He looks royal, right? We know Buddha was a prince. All right, so this means wish fulfilling jewel. That's all that means. Okay, here's some context. So let's go back in time. Before the 7th century, China gives India a present. China gives India a present, and the present is a magical piece of fabric that has no end. I don't know what that means, unless it's like a giant infinity scarf. I don't know, but a magic piece of fabric that has no end. And India, as a thank you, gives China Jowo Rinpoche, the sculpture. So the original context is this was given as a gift in exchange for the never-ending fabric that was made in the heavens. So now China owns Jowo Rinpoche. Well, one of the Chinese princesses gets married to a prince in Tibet, and she takes with her to Tibet this Buddha. So it ends up in Tibet as a with a princess, right? As part of kind of her dowry, her wedding dowry. So it goes with her to Tibet. It's the most important image in all of Tibet. We talked about that. All right. So this idea of bringing offerings here, bringing prayers here. It's also possible, let's say that Sydney's mom isn't sick, but she just wants to go see this Buddha. She can be blessed just by laying her eyes on this golden figure, right? That blessing can happen just by witnessing the object, the divine thing itself. We call this process, and I just write this on your notes somewhere, liberation through seeing. Maybe function. Liberation through seeing, meaning that when you look at this object, not in a picture, but in real life, you can be relieved of some of the things holding you back, right? Never fear. Maybe you can't make it to Tibet, but you could hop on a plane and go to Boston. So there is a U.S. Jowo Rinpoche in Boston, and it has the same wish fulfilling ability as the original. So you can go and get your own there. Yeah. It is a pilgrimage site. It is a pilgrimage site. This is Amanda. Hey. He's on his way. And then the whole point in Buddhism of having this pilgrimage, of getting these wishes and all this, is going to help one lead towards enlightenment, right? Enlightenment is like the finish line, right, of your goal as a Buddhist, enlightenment. So working towards enlightenment. Now, if you can't get in, let's say that Sydney gets all the way to the Zhongheng temple, she doesn't have the money to get into the temple, right? She can worship outside of the temple as long as she's facing towards this divine being. It could work. It could count, right? So if we think about what this is going to represent, this compassion for others, loving kindness, peace, wisdom, it's almost like just these good things that come from this being, from this object. So themes, divine, right? It's a divine object, divine being. Ritual, right? Bringing that little slip of paper here with an ill person's name on it and burning it as an offering or a wish. Sometimes, so like Sydney can't walk up and touch this Buddha, but the monks can. The monks could take something that Sydney brings to it and actually touch it to the gold of Buddha. And it's almost like activating, right, or blessing this object. Remember, because Buddha authenticated this object, it's good. It's legitimate. Questions? Okay. It's a sculpture of Buddha when it comes down to it. That's what we're looking at. Our one piece from Tibet. All right, so let's go to Jerusalem because that makes sense next to just hop on over to Jerusalem. So this structure, you might have seen it before. It's called Dome of the Rock. Dome of the Rock, and it is a dome built on top of a famous rock, much like the title suggests. So this is Umayyad in its most specific sense. It is an Islamic site. Multiple renovations. I think in the 90s, late 90s or early 2000s, they finished the Golden Dome across the top. And that was kind of supposed to be like what we see at, or not what we see, what we read about they did in Peru at Corey Concha, the Golden Temple. Remember how it was covered in gold? And so it's like blinding. But now the blinding is like this dome with a crescent on top in the middle of this holy sacred city. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. So what could you say is culture here? So Islamic would work, Umayyad would work, and Jerusalem would work. Any of those. You don't have to have all three. Any of those would work. Yeah. They will not expect you. And they're not like, what if you said, I don't know how you'd say this, but what if you said rock dome or something like that? That's okay. Or dome of the stone, something like that. That's fine. They're going to know what you're talking about. Same thing with media. Again, if you have a couple of these, you're fine. If you said stone with ceramics, that's great. They do not expect you to have the whole freaking list. So we've talked about that importance of circle square. You guys are all going to join me in getting a circle square tattoo. Remember this conversation? Or what? Yeah, totally. So now instead of the circle square, which is great, it represents order and perfection and, you know, wholeness, we have octagon circle, which is just a complication of this original kind of simplistic shape. So it's still very geometric, right? To have this octagon building with a circle top. This building is decorative on the inside and the outside. Decorative on the inside and the outside, which is not true for all of our structures that we look at, but it's true here. All right. Okay. When I show you the picture, I'm not lying to you. Okay. This used to be the highest site in Jerusalem. Now it looks like it's just street level, but used to, where this is, the Haram al-Sharif or the Temple Mount used to be the highest point in Jerusalem. Now remember, things in the Middle East are often tumultuous, right? That's an area that has not seen true peace in a millennium or more. And so a lot of this comes from conflict between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? That is kind of centered in what we call the Holy Lands. So Jerusalem bears the brunt of a lot of that. So where this is located used to be the highest point in the city. Basically, it's just the top of a mountain, right? Like the very, very top of a mountain that they built a building on top of, like a little hat. Right? And then now the rest of the mountain's just kind of covered. They did not move the mountaintop. It's inside too. It's at this site, right? It is not a mosque, even though it is Islamic. It's an Islamic sacred space, but it's not a mosque. Just like a church can have a meeting house, but not be a church, right? It can be a sacred space without being the traditional mosque form. It's one of the earliest Islamic buildings we have. Okay, here's some context. I'm going to simplify it for you. We have a civil war going on here in this larger Islamic culture. One side gets Mecca. Well, that's a problem because what about all these other Muslims who need to go to Mecca? So, Dome of the Rock was built as a secondary pilgrimage site for those who could not get to Mecca during the Civil War, right? It was built as kind of a this will do for the people who are more to the west. There is a mosque nearby at this same kind of location. Madrasas is schools. At least 4 different religions consider this site sacred. So of course it's going to be our 3 monotheistic, right? Christianity, Islam, Judaism. But so does the pagan mythology, because there was at some point a temple here, like a Roman or Greek temple. So converging cultures is one of our themes. Converging cultures. All right, so why is this rock so important? Well, Abraham in the Old Testament, or the Torah of the Bible, depending on Christian or Judaism, Abraham, this founding father of the faith, had 2 sons. Now, if you follow Christianity or the Jewish culture, you go from Abraham to his younger son, Isaac, right? If you follow Islam, you go from Abraham to his older son, Ishmael. That's where the religion split, is with the offspring of Abraham. So Abraham had a son named Ishmael with his slave Hagar, okay? And then he also had a son with his wife Sarah. So this is believed to be the spot, according to Christians and Jews, where Abraham went up the mountain to sacrifice his son Isaac because God asked him to, right, in the Christian faith, in the Jewish faith. But then when he got there to the top, an angel stopped him, and there was a ram, and Isaac lived, right? This is also where the Temple of Solomon in the Old Testament was built, right? The Temple of Solomon. So same location, different story. It's considered the 3rd holiest site in Islam because this is the same rock. Everything happens at one place, okay? This is the rock where Muhammad went on his night journey. When Muhammad was on his night journey, he got to see the cosmos, and he got kind of like this aerial view of things. He also got to see Jesus and God and heaven and hell. And so he came back and kind of reestablishes Islam. So all that happened at this same rock. It's a very important rock. So these are all different, plus there was a pagan temple here. So these are all different functions of this site. It doesn't look that high or high up at all, right? So again, remember, this used to be the highest point. Now it's just kind of part of the city. You might have y'all heard of the Jewish Wailing Wall? It's here. Okay, the Jewish Wailing Wall is here. So there are 3 different groups sharing this same site. But the only people allowed inside the Dome of the Rock are Muslims. So there are some different restrictions based on your faith where you can go at the Temple Mount. Again, the rock has not moved. It's still in the same spot. They've just built up around it. Here's what it looks like inside. So you have the rock is in the middle, and they built this ambulatory around it, this walkway around it. Light is another good theme here. A lot of emphasis on light because of the mosaics. We talked about Ur Wakui, right? The fear of empty space filled with mosaics. So I would link in this piece to Sembatale. Sembatale, which was Byzantine, that church that was an octagon stacked up. It was the one that had Justinian and Theodora mosaics inside. So kind of Spoila is used here. The columns across the front and the columns on the interior are ancient Roman. They found within the last 50 years, they found a cave inside the rock, but they don't know what it's for. It's just there, just kind of a cave down there. All right, so again, it's just built right over that rock. This is what it looks like when you go in. Again, it's very restricted who can go in, but this is what it looks like when you go inside. It has that colorful marble. It looks like San Vitale. Very, very similar. Because this is an Islamic sacred site, even though it's not a mosque, there's no human figures or animals. Has to just be designs. We call that aniconic. Form. You could say that the layout, not only is this stacking like a Byzantine church, it's also kind of related to an imperial tomb. We call those mausoleums. Places where emperors were buried were kind of these stacked, almost like a cake, right? These stacked structures. The form was also meant to compete with a Christian structure also in Jerusalem called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it's kind of hard to say, but sepulchre is the place where Jesus's tomb was said to be. I tell you, everything happens in Jerusalem. It's just every story is there. So it's possible that there was a competition between which building could be more important and noticeable. One, this includes the top of that rock as evidence of, these three different faiths. And then the Church of the Holy Sepulchre includes or encases the tomb of Jesus. So they're both kind of built on these rock formations. The text on the outside, this blue should make you think Persian, right? Going all the way back to the Standard of Ur. This blue lapis lazuli is important. And so this is text from the Quran on the outside. This picture's like super bright, but it was one of the only pictures I could find that shows the marble across the front. And so another way that it's like San Vitale is this colored marble that's kind of filleted out in these butterfly patterns. And then spoila columns. Questions about this site? Okay. Let's go to Iran. You don't have to put the untranslated part on here if you don't want to, but please put more than just Great Mosque, because Great Mosque is like 4 of our pieces, right? So Great Mosque, like it's like saying self-portrait. Well, we looked at like 10 self-portraits. So Great Mosque of Isfahan or Great Mosque of Iran, either of those would work. Isfahan or Iran. And then date, if you just want to say 700s up to the 2000, or 1900s, because this building has been added to over 1,000-year period. I mean, they just keep changing and adding and making different decisions. Stone, brick, ceramic, those are probably the most important media. All right, remember Santa Sabina, 4th century Christian church built spoila based off the basilica design in ancient Rome. Remember how it was ugly on the outside but beautiful on the inside? It was kind of supposed to replicate like what the perfect Christian would be. Well, this building, even though it's a mosque, it also kind of follows that. It's very plain and non-attractive on the exterior, and then the beauty's within. The beauty's focused on the interior of the structure. All right, this structure right here, the part we're looking at right here is called E1. I would put this under content. E1. It's IWAN. And so this building, this type has 4 E1. IWAN. And an E1 is just like a foyer, like an entrance. It's this big blue shaped thing with the 2 minarets coming out of the top and the dome. So one of the things that happens in cultures, I would say in ancient cultures, but not even in ancient cultures. I mean, it happens in cultures even today. When someone's in charge, whether we're talking about a mayor, a governor, a king, a president, when they're in charge, they want to make some sort of change that they'll be remembered for, right? Hopefully positive. Hopefully a positive change. And I don't mean just changing a law or changing something. I mean, building something, right? Because people like to build something as a way of being remembered. Well, each of the different kings, not all of them, but 4 of them, are competing throughout these years from 700 up into 1400 with who can build a cooler, better, more fascinating E1. So there's 4 E1s in this building. They're built by 4 different kings who are all competing with each other to who can show more power and authority. Right? So competition to build this. So not only is this aesthetic decision being made, it's political competition with each one that's built. So this is somebody's, this is one of the kings. And do you all remember Macquarnas? Macquarnas? They're the things that hang down off the ceiling. Macquarnas, they're like 3D. So these kind of geometric shapes that are hanging down almost like pixelated or fractured honeycomb, these are Macquarnas. Now, the best Macquarnas are the ones at the Alhambra that look like crunchy sponges hanging from the ceiling. Remember how I want to bite them? Yeah, I don't want to bite these. These don't look very tasty because they're way too big and like solid and geometric. I like the spongy looking ones, but these are still Macquarnas, these kind of like stalactite ceramic, almost like, I don't know, like a skewed version of a disco ball or something, right? These repeated forms. Here's something that's unusual about this mosque, and I would put this under context. It is in the city center. It's in the city center. So we don't live in a walkable city, right? Our city is really much based upon driving. And so you want to go meet someone for coffee, you're probably driving there, or riding a bike, something like that. But in this city, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, right? And certainly in antiquity, before cars, there was a lot of pedestrian traffic. So this is not an isolated sacred space. Instead, it becomes a space that you cross through to get somewhere else. So if I'm going to meet Ginger for coffee and I'm on one side of the mosque and she's on another, I would just walk through the mosque to get to the cafe. I'm not going to go around it. Even if we think about New York City, which is a very walkable city, right? If I'm meeting somebody for coffee on the other side of St. Patrick's Cathedral, I'm not going to go into St. Patrick's Cathedral, walk all the way down the nave, and then likely through one of the side doors. Just because, I don't know, in America, we're kind of like weird about stuff, and like you're going to church, you want it to be like part of a like certain sacred event. This is not this way, right? Instead, this is just like a pass through. Like a every day you might just stroll through it. And so there's maybe an accessibility here we don't typically see with a sacred space. 4E1 is what we call this design, this layout, right? So you have these 4 different kind of arched openings at this mosque. And so this is a change because up to this point, you would really just have 1 or 2 main entrances, right? So this is a change. Then College Park gives us this context picture. And I was like, okay, well, what am I supposed to get from that? What we're supposed to get from this is this wall that goes down to this dome right here at the back. All of this is the wall of the mosque. And so what they're trying to show us here is it's right part of the heart of the city, right? You walk through it to get from one side to the other. Here's the kind of model view of it. Again, it's ugly on the outside, beautiful on the inside. Each one of these E1 designed by a different king, right? And this king obviously is winning the competition here. So trying to get more impressive, more memorable. This roof type is called bubble wrap, which obviously looks like bubble wrap. Those are different domes. And then in the right, smack dab in the middle, we have a stage, the minbar, where you can have a speaker speak from, and then you have fountains for washing. Some of the domes have holes for light, right? Oculi. The places where there is not blue tile, they do just decorative brickwork. So here's an example of like the decorative brickwork. So even though there's no color in this space, or it's all one color, there's still this decorative element. And that's pretty unique just for this culture. Pointed arch is going to be your main shape. There's some people out drawing. I don't know, the E1, they almost feel like they're too big or something for the scale. Have this flatness to them. It's very different. All right, last thing to note. The design of this building became very iconic for this region. And so one of the kings decided to build a bazaar. Now, bazaar is not like the word bazaar, like weird, but bazaar, B-A-Z-A-A-R, a shopping center. And because this mosque is so iconic in its design, the bazaar, as you can see here in the picture, was built to mimic the imagery, right? The layout, the form of the mosque. That's how important it is to this culture. Questions about the mosque?
In our Google form, it said like which other work involves Salim II.
This one? This one?
Oh, is it that one?
For that piece? No, no, no.
It was the one that you gave us today.
So, yes. So, the other work that goes with Selim II is from prehistory, or not prehistory, oh my gosh, from medieval. And it was the Great Mosque of Selim II.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it was saying what work relates to that one.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
The one we just did.
That's okay. No, well, it was supposed to be like he owned this and he built this, like same person.
Okay. I looked
Yeah.
it up and it said something about this one, so I just.
Oh, you're confused. Okay, well, I might just throw it out if it's confusing everybody. But I just wanted you to make that connection, like he owned it, but he built it. Yeah. Okay, so this is a piece you guys did on your own. The folio from the Quran. We talked about this, how sad it is when people Sharpie things. We never Sharpie things, right? Okay. Hopefully y'all got that. Baptistry of St. Louis, y'all did this piece on your own or are supposed to do this piece on your own. If you haven't written down the info for it, do. Again, this is your typical Egyptian, Islamic, Christian, French object. The baby, when they baptize a baby in here, it's like a sprinkle baptism. You're not putting the whole baby. It's not like a serving dish. you know, sprinkle. All right, so finish that piece. All right, so let's, we're gonna stay with our Persian aesthetic here, and we're gonna look at a page from a book. And so the book is called Shahnameh, Shahnameh, which just translates as Book of the Kings. Book of the Kings, the Shahnameh. So this folio, remember folio just means page. So this folio is called Bahram Gur Fights the Karg, which sounds kind of like, I don't know, like a weird cartoon or something maybe. Bahram Gur Fights the Karg. This is Converging Cultures. Power and Authority. Work on Paper. Luxury Object. There are only 10 surviving complete copies of the Shahnameh. Only 10. College Board gives us 2 of the 10. Just seems like a high percentage. The text is written in those columns. That's what the text is. So just like a picture book, you're going to have images, you're going to have words, illustration. Every king would commission their own Shahnameh. Every king, every Persian king would commission their own Shahnameh because it represents that you're the guy in charge. Because remember, books are expensive, require a lot of effort, they take years to do. All right, so what is the Shahnameh? The Shahnameh is the longest epic poem ever written by a single author. The author's name is Tusi, Tusi, Tusi. And it is 60,000 verses long. That's a really long poem. Somebody asked last period, what makes a poem epic rather than just a poem? I was like, I think the length of it and the whether or not it's historical, right? Like the Odyssey or the Iliad, right? So a poet named Tusi writes this long book and he presents it to the king. And you know what the king said? And it was very sad for Tusi. And it wasn't until years later that his work was actually really accepted. And now the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, is like a clear pride story, heroic story of the Persians. But it's sad that at first they were like, we don't really care. So context, this story is still celebrated in Persia today. It is divided into 3 parts. Mythical, meaning like made up, right? Mythical. Heroic, which is also mostly made up. And then 1/3 historical. So it's only 1/3 real and 2/3 fantasy. Okay. All right. Zoroastrianism. You guys heard of this religion? Zoroastrianism. It's a Persian religion, has some similarities with some other faiths. The only person I know of who is famous that was Zoroastrianism or Zoroastrianism is Freddie Mercury from Queen. He was, and so that's what I always think of. But it's a faith, right? It was really popular in the 1970s. It's kind of like a new age thing, but it's traditional in the Persian culture. Content, every illustration in the Shahnameh contains either a sunrise and a sunset. And so that's to represent the passage of time. So it's an illustrated poem. All right. Okay, down here, we already talked about that part. A mirror for princes. What this means is that even though at first the Shahnameh story, the poem, whatever, is not accepted, over time it becomes really important to their culture. And every king, as I mentioned, would have one made to show his authentication. So one of the things that starts happening is as the Persians are overthrown by different groups, the kings who overthrow them have Shahnamehs made as well to show that, oh, actually they're in charge. So some of the same stuff we saw the Spanish doing to the indigenous people, right? Taking some of their power symbols. And I would link this to this book, The Moralized Bible of Blanche of Castile with Louis IX. Because remember, this book was made as a symbol of power at his coronation, and it contained all he needed to know about the apocalypse, about good stories from the Bible, calendars, prayers. And so the Shahnamehs start being made so that the king, the Persian king, has all that information at his disposal. Okay, so let's look at the content on this page. You have a wolf rhino hog thing that has one really long horn. Look at the length of this horn. Okay? And he has just been decapitated by Barmgur. Barmgur is the king, and he has over his shoulder a fan-shaped blade that he just used to decapitate the card. He has arrows in his quill that he can use, right? He also has another sword, so he is well armed. I like how he looks very nonchalant. He's just kind of looking back like, yeah, I just did that. It was easy. It was no big deal. Behind his head is the sun. So the sun becomes almost like a halo for him, but we also have the crown, right? We have both of those aspects. And then the horse with the really long skinny neck, and he's just like trotting, like gonna like step over the dead beast. I'm not sure. So this represents that political power, the control of the military, right? So again, just like we have a bunch of different copies of, Homer's Iliad, right? We're going to have a bunch of different copies of this book. We only have 10 left that they know of that are intact. And this is one of the artist's interpretations. Now, a different artist could interpret this story differently, right? Like Little Red Riding Hood, you could see it drawn by all different artists. The story remains the same. We talked about the fact that this Shahnameh or Shahnamehs like this were appropriated by other groups who are trying to control the Persians. So appropriated by other groups to control the Persians. All right, so what else do we see happening here? We see the Mongol enthusiasm for painting, specifically detail painting. Many of the trees and landscapes of the Shahnameh books are Chinese aesthetic. Some of the clothing depicted in the books are European. And then this codex influences later Persian painting. So I would say something about tradition change, converging cultures, power and authority. Good. Got it? All right, so this next piece that you guys had to do on your own, or have to do on your own, The Court of the Gaimars, is another Shahnameh book. It's the same story as the Shahnameh we just saw. This is just a different part of the poem. It's still a Shahnameh. Okay, it's a different part of the story. So the part of the story is not Barham Gur fights the cards. It's the Court of the Gaimars, which is like this is a creation story, good versus evil, like Adam and Eve and the snake. This is a good versus evil creation story that we see depicted. So we know which king owned this. It was Shah Tahmasp. And then we know the artist was Sultan Muhammad. This manuscript, the whole book, took 20 years to make. That's a lot of dedication for a book. But it's for the king, so, you know, I mean, seems important. What does the word folio mean again? Page. So this is saying folio 20, page 20, verso. Verso's the front, recto's the back, right? Your rectum's in the back. So verso, recto. So this is saying the front of page 20. That's all that means. Y'all will be deciphering manuscripts in no time after this class. This one has flecks of gold, which are really pretty. Like splatter painted around the outside. This is a big book, like the pages are big. And this form, the overall composition, we call like a candlelight or candle flame composition because it's like kind of the way that the shape comes up. All right, so you'll have that on your own. So this is our last piece. And 7. Look at us. We're amazing. Oh, did y'all have, well, y'all have to do that on your own, but did anyone do it and still have questions? This piece? Okay. All right, so artable carpet. Artable carpet. Think about like how expensive and important Persian rugs are. So this is a Persian rug. We might know the artist, Maqsud of Kashan. I don't know how important it is that you need to know that name, but it's just that's the possible artist because that's the name that's on the rug. Persian, Safavid dynasty, silk and wool. So we've talked about warp and weft before when we looked at our Persian, no, not Persian, Peruvian Incan all Tokapu tunic. So warp, the warp is the silk. That's what, think about that as your longitude. And then weft goes right and left. Weft is your latitude. So it's silk and wool, hand-tied knots. 25 million of them. That's a lot of work. Whole lot of work. And there's 2 matching carpets, and they were made over about a 4-year period. So we got lots of artists working, not just one artist. Everyone's tying knots. That's 340 hand-tied knots per square inch. This is one of the oldest Islamic carpets that we have. When people, again, talk about Persian rugs, usually there's an idea of quality. It's large, 34.5 feet by 17.5 feet. It's a big rug. All right. Trade object. Right now, this exact rug probably was not traded, but typically rugs were trade objects. Their function, they can obviously be used on the floor like we use a rug today, but they can also be hung on the walls to provide warmth and decoration. And this is just called Artible carpet because Artible is the name of the town where it's from. It went inside, so it was displayed inside a shrine to a Sufi saint. So Sufism is, you'll know how like Christianity has a lot of different flavors? Well, Islam has a lot of different flavors. And so Sufism is the mystic side of Islam, the more mystic side. All right, so if we think about the layout of the shrine, there were two identical rugs. Artible carpet is one of two, so duality would be a theme. Two identical rugs. And they went in this shrine and they filled that room. Then there was an earthquake and the shrine was destroyed, and then they were uncovered. Looking at the color, not bright, right? It's much more dull in color. And that's because it's using all natural dyes, nothing synthetic. So pomegranate, indigo, avocado, right? Just your typical kind of natural dye colors. If we think about a rug today, you're going to pay by square inch the knots, right? So a really cheap rug, like an IKEA rug, like this one up here, right? It's probably pretty close to like 70 to 80 knots per square inch, whereas this one's 340. And then of course, this is going to be machine made versus handmade. So there's obviously a different level of quality. And the content, there's nothing human here, nothing alive here. Well, I mean, plants are alive, but nothing like, figurative. Lanterns are important in the Islamic aesthetic. And so we have two lanterns on each rug, but the lanterns don't match, which is a little bit unusual. So like one up there at the top, it's bigger, and this one at the bottom is smaller. And then the thing in the middle is the medallion, which is also pretty traditional. At one end, it is, quote, signed, not exactly signed, but sort of. And so there is a name here in a short poem. Again, the artist isn't, or the maker, or whomever, isn't really writing on the object. This is hand tied on. So, except for thy threshold, there is no refuge for me in all the world. Except for this door, there's no resting place for my head. The work of the slave of the portal, Masjid Kashani. So, he's saying that he's a servant to somebody, right? The one who made it, right? It's in honor of somebody else. He was probably the court official. He's not the one who actually like tied all the knots. Typically, that's going to be women who do soft work like this. And then door can mean shrine. All right, so of course the British get involved because the British get involved in everything. So we know that as far as 1843, they're still on site, they're still there. The earthquake happened, they were sold off. This British company comes along and purchases them in 1892. I'm sorry, purchases one of them in 1892 for 2,000 pounds. It had been restored in a way that we don't restore things today. Basically, you have two identical damaged rugs. one has more damage than the other. Instead of just trying to repair each rug or go, okay, we're just going to leave them alone, they decided to take apart the more damaged rug and use those pieces to fix the one. So now you have one repaired rug and one rug that's even more damaged, right? Like sacrificing one for the other. So the one that's most whole ends up in London at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The one that is more damaged, less complete, is in LA. So neither of them even are in the Persian culture anymore. This is what the one that's more intact looks like. This is in the UK. So there's a person in the background. Maybe it'll kind of help you see scale a little bit, but these are big rugs. And they're kept sealed to protect them, right? Natural materials, natural dyes. Wool and silk can both be eaten by moths, right? So they have to protect these objects and keep them sealed. Now, traditionally, because these are trade objects, you would roll up a rug, sell it, give it to someone else, whatever, and it would go with you. But because this wasn't a shrine, it would have been pretty permanent there. Not like in your bedroom at home, you might have wall-to-wall carpeting, right? Remember, this isn't going to be wall-to-wall. This is going to be decorative. So yes, it fills that space, but it doesn't cover everything, if that makes sense. All right, questions about this object? Theme, so go duality, because there were two. Well, there are two, it's just, they're not complete. I would say power and authority, because we know that this was made for a shrine by a court official, right? So it does denote some sort of importance. Sacred space, because it's a shrine where this was located. Could have also had funerary, we don't know for sure, but a shrine kind of fits into that idea. And then trade, or like commerce, right? It's an object that was traded or has commercial value. All right. So yeah, that's it for 7. Now that we're done with 7, I can tell you 7 is not my favorite content area. It's actually my least favorite content area. But I try to feign excitement. Did I fool anyone? Thank you. Thank you, Carson. I try. I really. Yeah. So things are looking up from here, guys. Things are looking up from here. You want to look at your clouds, sister? You want to look at your clouds? See ya. Do you want to look at your clouds?
Oh, I'm gonna take it home.
You're gonna take it home? Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
See ya. Yeah. And you're using that picture you showed me? Or you have a different picture of clouds?
Well, I'm just gonna,
You know, yeah.
I'm not gonna do it.
Okay.
Just similarly.
I might just find some multiple images that you could pull from. That's what I typically do. Okay, right.
Now these are the white sheets.
Right, and then think about, usually there's like, what cumulus tiles? The kind that have like, kind of,
The Toy Story ones.
like the one you showed me earlier, I don't know, is that Toy Story?
I have no idea.
The ones that are kind of like flat on bottom and the puppy on the top? And those are sometimes easier to paint because they're gonna come across as more real than the ones that are just kind of like, blocks. Hey, of course, sure. That makes sense. Do you need,
No, I just use soap.
okay. If you add a little vegetable oil in there, it'll help break it down.
Sounds good.
How did this show go, Hannah?
Oh, it went really well.
I saw your pictures. Your mom posted them on Facebook.